Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I am here today at the James Julia Auction House up in Maine, and I'm taking a look at some of the guns that they're going to be selling in their March of 2016 auction. And as usual, they have a number of cool transferable machine guns here, and one of them is this. This is a 1941 Johnson light machine gun. These are one of the lesser known and lesser appreciated U.S. military machine guns of the Second World War. Now, of course, the reason that they are lesser known and appreciated is that, in reality, very few of these actually saw service. In total, about 3,400 were manufactured, and they were manufactured primarily for the Dutch government. Stepping back a little bit, Melvin Johnson, the inventor, had put up a really good fight trying to get his self-loading rifle adopted by the U.S. military as either a replacement or a substitute, a side-by-side substitute for the M1 Garand. And he just couldn't quite pull it off. Really, the problem was that Johnson was a little bit too late. By the time he was in the game, the Garand had basically already been adopted, and he was fighting to get it replaced. The Johnson 1941 semi-automatic rifle really was quite a good gun. In testing, it was basically the equal of the M1. There are a few places where one of the rifles did better than the other, but in general, it was just as good as the M1. The problem was the M1 was already adopted, so if the Johnson was going to take over and justify the cost of replacing something that has just finally been adopted after 15 plus years of trials and development, it would have had to be a lot better than the M1, and it wasn't. Well, as a companion gun to his self-loading rifle, Johnson had also developed this light machine gun. Functionally, mechanically, it's basically identical to the rifle. It has a box magazine feed instead of a rotary fixed magazine. And it's got a different pistol grip and buttstock setup. It's got a bipod on it, that sort of thing. But those are really ancillary changes. The heart of this rifle is the same as the 1941 Johnson self-loading rifle. At any rate, Johnson failed to really convince the U.S. military to adopt his guns, but he did get a nice contract from the Dutch government. They wanted these guns to go use in the Dutch colonies in the East Indies. They ordered a bunch of rifles and machine guns, and then, unfortunately, in between when they were manufactured and when they were paid for and shipped, the Japanese did this annoying thing of invading and taking over most of the Dutch colonies, which ended the shipments out there. Obviously, once the Japanese take over, Johnson's not going to ship guns to colonial forces that don't exist. So what ended up happening was he had a bunch of rifles and machine guns manufactured and basically nowhere to go, and ended up selling them to the U.S. government. At that point, they weren't being formally adopted on a widespread, on a large scale, but hey, the guns are there, they're made, they're chambered for .30-06, standard U.S. cartridge and ammunition. The U.S. would be kind of foolish not to use them. And what they ended up doing was they went to the U.S. Marine Corps. So specifically the U.S. Paramarines, the airborne Marine Corps units, did get these guns. Now that's because this is a recoil-operated gun, which means the barrel actually reciprocates. There we go. A little hard to demonstrate with the bolt locking up. However, the barrel reciprocates when you shoot, which allows you to have a very easily quick change barrel, which isn't so much, especially on the rifle, necessary for rate of fire or cooling or anything. But what it means is you can pull the barrel out and make this gun into a very compact package, which is perfect for paratroops. So the Paramarines got both rifles and light machine guns, very much liked them. So one of the other units of particular historical note, really the other unit of note that got these guns, was the 1st Special Service Force, the FSSF. That was a unit of American and Canadian troops, sort of elite commandos, who did various special forces type raids in larger numbers than we would typically think of special forces today. And they actually got these apparently by trading. They had a lot of explosives, more than they needed. The Marine Corps or the Paramarines were short on explosives, but had a lot of extra Johnson guns. And so the two units kind of did a swap. And that's how the 1st Special Service Force ended up with a bunch of Johnson rifles and light machine guns. You will actually see pictures, vintage pictures of Johnson light machine guns being used in Italy, for example. So they showed up there. They were at Anzio in particular. They were used on Bougainville and Guadalcanal. a number of the other early Marine Corps battles in the Pacific did see, pretty much anywhere the Paramarines were, you would end up with some Johnson rifles being used. So mechanically, this is a short recoil gun. The barrel reciprocates, so there's no gas system or tube. Johnson's had written that he had looked at all of the different operating mechanisms, blowback, gas-operated guns, long recoil, short recoil, and he came to the conclusion that short recoil was the best of them for a military gun. He didn't like the idea of gas-operated guns. He thought that they were potentially easily fouled. You had extra gas tubes and extra moving parts that weren't necessary. Long recoil is complex. Simple blowback and delayed blowback mechanisms tend to restrict you to light cartridges, something weaker than a standard 30-06. He came to short recoil and really liked it. So he found it to be clean, simple, and easy operating system. In fact, that's part of why his self-loading rifle failed to secure adoption by the US military, is because the barrel reciprocates, you ended up with some issues attaching bayonets to it. Really, a short recoil gun isn't ideal for mounting extra junk hanging off the barrel. You can affect the timing of the gun. You kind of want a stable, non-moving bayonet mount if you're going to be stabbing things, and a reciprocating barrel doesn't lend itself well to that. So that was part of his problem on the rifle. On the light machine gun, that poses no problem at all, unless you're the Japanese hanging a bayonet on your light machine guns. You don't need to worry about it. So, a couple basic statistics on this thing. It weighs just over 14 pounds in this configuration with an empty magazine. That is a fantastic weight, by the way. This gun balances and handles very well. There's not a whole lot of weight out front. Most of the weight's here in the back. Unlike the BAR, in fact, the BAR is the perfect comparison to make to the Johnson light machine gun. The BAR had a 20-round magazine. The Johnson has a 20-round magazine. It looks very long because this is actually a single stack mag. What's interesting is it'll hold 20 rounds in the magazine. This was standard, by the way. There were some longer magazines made, but this is what saw military service. You can reload the magazine via stripper clips through the action. And what's interesting is you can actually load an additional 5 rounds into the magazine well and the action on top of a fully loaded 20-round magazine. So it's a 20-round mag, but you actually have a capacity of 25 effectiveness. These were reportedly very well liked by the 1st Special Service Force, and also by the Paramarines. Everyone who uses them in combat seemed to be very happy with them. One of the comparisons you can make, and Johnson apparently was pretty stringent on this point, is that he didn't like to call this a light machine gun. He preferred to call it an automatic rifle or a light automatic rifle. His concept with this was one of flexibility, that it could be used as a combat rifle. You can fold the bipod up in front, or even simply easily detach the bipod and use this like the BAR was intended, full auto from the shoulder or from the hip. You also have the bipod allowing long-range semi-auto shooting, allowing sustained fire from positions, your quick change barrel, should you need to put down sustained fire for position defense or something like that. You can have extra barrels, you can swap them out, your magazine fed. The side-mounted magazine is particularly useful for a 2-man team, a gunner and an assistant gunner. Really, one of the great strengths of the Johnson light machine gun is its flexibility in this way. You can do most anything with it. In fact, in this way, it's kind of analogous to the German FG-42, the Fallschirmjägergewehr, which had a lot of the same features. Lightweight, magazine fed, had a bipod, but it was semi or full auto. A lot of the same flexibility. The Johnson, I think, is a better design for that. This was flexible with an emphasis on suppressive fire, supporting fire, full auto fire. The FG-42 was kind of the other way. It was flexible, but with an emphasis on being a shoulder rifle. All right, let's start by taking a look at a couple of the markings here. We've got patent information. These were manufactured by Johnson's company, Johnson Automatics. It's caliber 30-06. These were made in Rhode Island, as you can see. This is a fairly early one, serial number 360. Now, another element that I'd like to take a closer look at is the rear sight on this. It's a folding rear sight, and it's kind of an elevation drum. So again, we have some similarities to the German FG-42, although this predates it. You'll notice the rear sight flips up this way, and our range markings are then on the front of the sight, which doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. However, the way this is adjusted is you use the rear aperture, and your range settings are done by aligning these range markings with this line on the receiver. So as I spin this drum, I can lift the sight up. There we go. So for example, right there, I've got this set to right at 400 yards. I would then flip the sight up. I aim through the lower of the two apertures, and presto. It folds down for transport. We do also have a windage adjustment knob. So this moves in clicks. The windage is 1/3 of a minute per click. The elevation is actually in half-minute clicks if you prefer to use it that way instead of the preset range markers. I believe the detent ball in this particular one is missing. You can use the hash marks, but this example doesn't actually have tangible clicks to it like the windage does. At any rate, there is a second aperture here. The top aperture is meant for what they call barrage fire, long-range volley fire, basically. This is intended for ranges of 1,000 out to 1,500 yards. You can see that the standard ranges go out to 1,000 yards only. So that's why you have the two different apertures there. All right, controls on the gun. We have a selector lever here. It's on the right side, which wouldn't really pass muster today, but hey, whatever, it works. We have semi-auto in the front, safe is vertical, and full auto is in the back. Now I mentioned that this fires from an open bolt on full auto and a closed bolt on semi. Allow me to demonstrate a little bit of that. So I'm going to lift the bolt handle up, which unlocks it, and then cycle the bolt back. On full auto, the bolt locks to the rear. When I pull the trigger, it drops. It would continue firing as long as it had ammo. Now, I can set it to safe. If I set it to semi-auto, it will now automatically drop the bolt but not fire, like so. So now I'm ready to fire in semi-auto mode. There it goes. And in semi-auto, it will not lock open. So do be aware this does not lock open on an empty magazine. So that's the fire control. Now we have a cool feature here for loading, and that is this. This is very similar to what you have in a Johnson semi-auto rifle, and we have a stripper clip guide built in there. So I can take a standard Springfield stripper clip, stuff it in the side here, and this is a stiff standard clip. There we go. And when I pop the last round in, it spits the clip out for me, closes the loading gate, and I now have 5 rounds on tap, ready to go. So I can do that even if I have a loaded magazine in the gun, which is kind of cool. Since we're looking at the magazine, well, I will also point out we have a really big magazine release lever here. Grab the mag, thumb that down, mag pulls out. You'll notice I have 1 round in there from when I ran the stripper clip. The other 4 are sitting in the action way. So there they are. All right, so a couple other quick features I want to show you on this magazine. This has no feed lips. This is the follower, and it's held in place by this curved spring latch. When you lock this into the magazine well, this latch is pulled up, which allows cartridges to feed. The feed lips are actually machined into the inside of the receiver. There are a couple guns that work like this. The other notable one is the Madison light machine gun. The idea is feed lips are an easily damaged part of a magazine. And if you can manufacture the feed lips in the gun, milled into the receiver, you know they're pretty much protected from damage. And then that's one less thing you have to worry about on your magazines. It also makes the magazines much easier and faster and cheaper to manufacture if you don't have a precision surface like a feed lip that you have to get just right on every one. Now, to load this, you can load them 1 round at a time, or very slickly, you can actually take a standard stripper clip, stuff it in the magazine here, and this is a tight clip. Presto. 5 rounds, empty clip. And you can repeat that 3 more times until you have a fully loaded magazine. All right, disassembly of the Johnson is really remarkably easy. I'm going to start by locking the bolt all the way back. That way the bolt head is not locked into the barrel, and we'll take the barrel out. There is a pin right here, and we have our primary disassembly tool, which is a cartridge case. I'm going to push in on this pin. That will unlatch the barrel right there. So this is the reciprocating spring that forces the barrel back into position. All right, now that I have this latch undone, I can pull the barrel out. This one's a little tight, takes a little bit of a yank. There we go. Now, there is our complete barrel. We have a bearing surface back here. Doesn't that look familiar? Kind of like an AR-15, doesn't it? The bolt head locks up into a rear trunnion that is integral to the barrel there. We have a surface here that the barrel rides on to make sure that everything stays nice and straight. And then there is our very distinctive swooping front sight. All right, so in order to do the rest of the disassembly, I want to relieve tension on the mainspring, so I need to drop the bolt. I also want to make sure that the hammer stays cocked. You'll see why in a moment, which means the easiest way to do this is simply to switch it to semi. So bolt's closed, hammer remains locked back in the gun, and now I have this button right here, which is captive. I push that in, and now you can see I have separated the upper and the lower. These two just slide on a set of rails, and the lower assembly comes right off the bottom of the gun. We'll take a closer look at that in a moment. First, we are going to, let's get the bolt out of the way here. There we go. We'll pull the bolt out in a minute. However, the next thing we want to do is take out the magazine well. So I'm going to push this follower down, and it just pulls out the back. So this is our magazine well assembly, all stamped. Pretty slick manufacture. You know, there's a lot of clever modularity that went into the Johnson. It was a very well thought out gun. Let's see, next thing we can do, let's take off the bipod. We have this spring-loaded catch, which I have to pull all the way back. So you can see the way the bipod locks up. We have a lug here with a hole in it, and then our bipod has this pin that just locks right through there. It has these two bent sheet metal loops that act as tensioners. So that provides some tension. It allows me to rock the bipod back and forth, but it tends to push it back to central when you're not applying force. All right, in order to take the bolt out, we have to take the bolt handle out first. The bolt handle is dovetailed into the bolt itself and held in place by a spring-loaded pin. So I need to pull that pin out, which is this little rod in the center of the bolt handle. So I'm going to grab that, pull it up, and then pull the bolt out while holding the handle in place. This is the trickiest bit of the operation. The easiest way to do it is actually to pull the bolt handle, the bolt all the way to the back, lift the pin up, and then you can actually pull the bolt out from underneath. There is our spring-loaded bolt handle. So the bolt is a two-piece assembly. We have a bolt head and a bolt body, and they simply pull off each other. So when the bolt is fully closed, it pushes into position like this. These two surfaces cam against each other and force the bolt to rotate into the locking lugs. When it fires, this whole assembly moves back because the barrel is moving back and this is held in place. When that happens, a cam forces these two to unlock, like so, and then they can travel rearward as a unit. So I can pull them apart. I have my firing pin here, which can be removed. It is held in place by a little spring clip, and then the firing pin comes out the front. Our extractor here is held in place right there, and it's loose now. What holds it in place is actually the pin on the bolt handle. Sits right there. So our fire control group here is also worth taking a look at for a moment. In semi-auto, when I pull the trigger, the hammer drops. Resets when it fires, pull the trigger, it fires again. Pretty simple. The safe position locks the trigger so nothing can happen. And then in full auto, this auto sear is lifted up into position. So you can see that in semi-auto, it's down and it comes up in full auto. What happens in full auto is when I pull the trigger, I'm simply pulling down this sear to allow the bolt to travel forward. When the bolt travels forward, it hits this auto trip. When I hit that, it releases the hammer to fire. And then when the bolt travels backward, it recocks the hammer. And as long as I'm holding the trigger, this block is down and allowing the bolt to continue to move. So when the bolt comes forward again, it'll trip the hammer again. So that is how the full auto open bolt, semi-auto closed bolt system works. And of course, having this up forces the bolt to lock into the rearward position when no longer firing. So one last thing to point out on the bolt here, the firing pin is right there. I can poke it with the extractor here, right there. So in order to have a hammer hit this, you have to have an opening in the bolt. And that's why there is this big open slot in the bolt. When the bolt's in battery, the hammer can come up through here, hit the firing pin, and fire the gun. We also have these two little locks, or denial bars, you could call them. And that is an out-of-battery safety to make sure that the hammer cannot fully drop if the bolt's not actually fully locked in place. So the difference in this amount of travel will either allow or deny the hammer to fall. So that's an important mechanical safety. These are fantastic guns, and if you are a collector of US military arms and would like a fantastic machine gun, you will not go wrong with this one. If you'd like to own it yourself, take a look at the description text below. You'll find a link to the James Julia catalog page on this gun. You can take a look at their description, their high-res pictures, and come down here in Maine to check it out and participate in the auction or place a bid live right there on the website. Thanks for watching.